Hey friends, so I kind of just wanted to sit here and talk at you a little bit.
Hello, what's up ladies and gentlemen, Renegade Slogan Media here. How are you all doing? Yeah, you probably know what video this is. You probably know who this is. Marinashutup. The video is more redheads in Game of Thrones than black people. Feminist Fridays. I don't mean to argue semantics here, but I don't think that feminism has anything to do with race, unless the whole platform has changed feminism into standing for the oppression of all minorities, according to their definition, not mine, not that I agree with it, or think that minorities are necessarily oppressed in the United States of America.
So I'm just going to talk about dumb shit that doesn't really matter.
I feel like I always interrupt at the introduction of my videos before they even get to make a point, because I have so much that I want to interject into this conversation. I'm glad that we both can agree that you're talking about shit that does not matter.
I feel like it's a particularly millennial thing to move back in with your parents after college, but also maybe we wouldn't have to if baby boomers didn't fuck up the economy and make things really hard for, college kids who are just trying to get an education without procuring massive amounts of debt.
This chick took a gender studies course in college and is blaming baby boomers for fucking up the economy. In my state, there is at least 9,000 vacant jobs for electricians. That's in the good old blue state of Oregon.
Alright, so on to the actually semi-substantial part of this video. I wanted to talk about Game of Thrones. I don't know if I've ever talked about Game of Thrones on this channel, which is weird because I minored in communications and I used to study English Lit. So talking about media and analyzing it critically is kind of my jam. I know I'm gonna get a lot of YouTube trolls telling me that it doesn't matter, it's just a show, blah blah blah.
Right off the bat, dismissing criticism as trolls. Classic.
Blah blah, but I think it would be foolish to think that the media that we consume, especially media as popular as Game of Thrones, where a large segment of the population is internalizing it and consuming it, I think it would be foolish to say that it doesn't affect us in some way. Popular media not only reflects current social values, but it also perpetuates them. Not only does it mirror society's norms and values, but it confirms them. It repeats them back to us.
Yes, it wouldn't be surprising to see media portray main characters mostly as white people due to the fact that they make up the biggest percentage of Americans in the United States of America. And that number jumps up even higher if you include white Hispanics as well. So it's probably safe to assume that white people are going to make up a bulk of media. There is nothing inherently racist about this, as you wouldn't go to Mexico and bitch about there not being enough white people portrayed in media, or you wouldn't bitch about white people going to Africa or the Middle East and bitching about white people not being the majority of the local media there. I don't understand why this idea is completely lost upon regressive leftists.
Like we've been thinking all along. I find that whenever I talk about representation, I get lots of people saying that representation doesn't matter, why are you worrying about this, etc., etc. And I also find that typically, not always, but typically, the people saying things like this are widely represented in society.
Or again, make up a bulk of society, therefore translates into media. Not to mention, can we please address the cultural difference between white America and black America that drives one of them to success? I know plenty of black successful people, one of them including my boss, one of them including my sister-in-law.
Good. So the reason that I've been thinking a lot about representation in Game of Thrones is because I've been staying with my family and both of my brothers love Game of Thrones. I love Game of Thrones. Most of my friends watch it. My boyfriend doesn't watch it because I don't understand him as a person, but it's been on at our house a lot, basically. But what I realized the other day is that there are more major characters in Game of Thrones that have red hair than there are black or Asian characters. And in case you were wondering, the population of black and Asian people in the entire world is much, much, much larger than the population of redheads.
Does she even know what Game of Thrones is? I don't even like the show. I don't necessarily find that it's a very attractive piece of film or cinematography. I get that a lot of people like it. That's, their opinion. They like whatever they want. But does she know what Game of Thrones is? What it's supposed to be based off of. It's not only is the series filmed in the United Kingdom, Iceland, Spain, basically, it's filmed in locations with a bunch of white people. You wouldn't think that you would have to explain that to people, but this show is also based, it's a fictional world in A Song of Ice and Fire novels, but it takes place in a world that is divided into several continents that is based on medieval Europe. Europeans. Anglo-American Europeans. Fucking Vikings. Basically, the whole story of Game of Thrones and what Game of Thrones is based on and what it's inspired by completely debunks anything that you give two shits about the representation of the cast. Just like in one of my favorite movies, Black Hawk Down, where the Army Rangers and the Delta Force went to Somalia after the United States Marines pulled out, part of a peacekeeping mission. I'm not upset at the fact that the Somalians were played by black Somalis as opposed to white Americans or white people or gingers. I didn't give a fuck. I'm not ginger, but I am, Caucasian, Hispanic, whatever. I'm not black. And I'm not pissed off at the fact that black characters or that black actors are playing as black people in a setting that is based on black culture and black people. Like, I wouldn't expect a movie that takes place in Egypt to be completely white. I don't expect Tyler Perry movies to hire a bunch of white people to showcase what black culture is like or what comes from the mind of a black person. Game of Thrones is very inspired and is a figurative take on European culture during the Dark Ages, the Medieval Ages, all of the, kingdoms, fucking dragons, all that type of lore is usually based, just like Skyrim, usually based on medieval Europe. Knights, Vikings, kings, all of that. That's generally what you would see content based on medieval Europe. Like Beowulf. There's just so much that is just wrong with your opinion on this. It's such a stupid opinion, and it's my right to tell you that your opinion is stupid and insignificant.
Yet somehow they dominate a lot of Game of Thrones, but I've also seen it in a lot of other, fiction. Harry Potter.
Again, Harry Potter is inspired and based around all of London. Really? Are you fucking kidding me? You're taking European works of fiction based on Europe, inspired by European culture, European lore, and getting upset that the fact that it was filmed in Europe, based on Europe, you're getting mad at the fact that they're not representing a population that barely exists in fucking Europe. Not only that, you're advocating for Daniel Radcliffe walking in to the audition as Harry Potter, and then a black person comes in behind him, and then you're like, well, let's go with the black person, because Daniel Radcliffe is white, and we need a black person in this main role because of racism, virtue signaling, because I want to prove that I'm pure, that I'm virtuous. So yeah, fuck Daniel Radcliffe. Let's just have this black guy. Harry Potter would never be the same. You'd probably sit there and contemplate, Daniel Radcliffe really fucking nailed this. He really nailed this position. He nailed the audition. I think he's going to be great for Harry Potter. But we need the black guy who's not a very good actor, just based on the fact that he's black. That's how your policies would work in the real world, honey.
I think it's just genetically impossible. It's a recessive trait, and I don't really give a fiction a fuck about the accuracy of redhead representation. I'm more concerned about the lack of representation of people of color in fantasy just in general. And that's not to say that there are zero people of color in fantasy or there's no people of color writing fantasy. I think Ursula Le Guin is a great example of this. I'm not disputing that there aren't important characters of color or authors of color who are making great contributions to the realm of fantasy.
Then what the fuck is this entire video about? I include science fiction into fantasy as well, science fantasy, space opera like Star Wars. So yes, I included Mace Windu from Star Wars and Will Smith, Robert Neville from I Am Legend, a white character I might add. played by in previous roles Vincent Price and Charleston Heston. But I think Will Smith's performance was off the fucking chart.
So when I did post on social media yesterday about Game of Thrones having more major characters with red hair than there were black people on the entire show.
Wait a second. Why is it that gingers are somehow threatening to the representation of black people? But as you said, gingers make up a very small percent of the world population. So are we concerned about brunettes and blondes as well who happen to be white or fair-skinned? I am just curious because she hasn't once mentioned any white people. It's poor blacks, gingers oppress black people. Or is this just selective outrage?
Definitely pissed off some nerd boys. Gotta love those nerdy fanboys who feel the need to be gatekeepers against any sort of critique of the things they love.
This is coming directly from the gatekeeper of black people.
If something is great, then it deserves to be, critiqued in a way that points out the pros and the cons.
I don't see how the casting has any effect about whether or not it's a great piece of cinematography. I make the same criticism about white people that bitched about Star Wars Rogue One.
One of the main arguments I received is that Westeros, which is the main region in Game of Thrones that is explored, but it does occasionally diverge from that, is based on medieval Europe.
See, now watch her try to come up with some bullshit excuse. I predict that is going to happen. I haven't watched this video yet, so I'm watching it as I'm giving my commentary. So watch this happen. Watch her give some bullshit excuse.
This discussion was the idea of Watsonism versus Doyleism, which I didn't know were terms until the other day, but they're super helpful in having these conversations. The terms originate from Sherlock Holmes, where Watsonian is referring to the fictional narrator, Dr. Watson, and Doyleism is referring to the actual author of the series, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. If you're someone who's taking a Watsonian perspective, then you're only thinking about your argument in terms of the fictional universe that was created. It's basically looking at things from the reality of the fictional work and only being able to explain things based on that reality. There's no outside author or cultural influence because you're only really gonna be thinking of things as if you were someone existing in that universe. Doyleism is the perspective that I personally tend to fall into because I used to major in, English literature, and that's what all of our papers and all of our study was looking at why an author did a certain thing and how they might have been influenced by the culture they were living in and how that affects the narrative.
Oh my gosh, how did I know? Some bullshit English literature that allows you to analyze stuff. Yes, authors, they make stories that they find intriguing, usually based off of experiences or cultures that they have. Me being a libertarian-leaning, anti-government Republican, blah blah blah, I'm really into things like Star Wars because it's about a rebellion. I really like The Patriot with Mel Gibson, whether or not it's historically accurate, because it's about rebellion. I love the American flag because it's about rebellion. I like the so-called Confederate flag, which isn't the real Confederate flag, not for Southern pride or because I like slavery, but because of the idea of rebellion. I am also Portuguese, which is why on my profile picture I have the Portuguese flag. So a lot of literature that I write about has to do with rebellion, limited government. Stories that I write have to do expressing my libertarian ideas. So yes, if you happen to live in Europe, or you happen to be white, or you happen to have an interest in medieval Europe, then you are going to write about those things that you have an interest in. I hope you have a quote from the author that said he fucking hates black people, that he hates them so much. Oh gosh, oh my god. Just completely bypass the setting of the universe that the Game of Thrones takes place in both the novel and the TV show. Just do that, please.
So when I talk about representation of Game of Thrones, but just in general, I'm not talking about, well, it only focuses on Europe and that's why there were no black people. I'm thinking of the motivations and the reasons and the potential biases that the author or the show creators might have had that would make them want to only focus on Europe and to only highlight white characters. It's like when you read a history book in high school and you think, oh, well, we're only learning about Europe and America, so that's where all of the important historical events happened. When you're in high
Yeah, because Europe played a huge part in the development of the United States of America. We weren't rebelling against the Mongolians. We weren't rebelling against fucking Egypt. We weren't rebelling against some African kingdom, some African colony. No, we weren't. We were rebelling against medieval Europe. So we study Europe to figure out why the fucking pilgrims, why the Quakers were seeking out to a new land, to America. That is why. That is absolutely the reason why in textbooks in the United States you learn about Europe mostly. And textbooks, you're comparing textbooks, which I agree textbooks are very flawed and give you a romantic version of history. But you are comparing textbooks to actual works of fiction, literature, fiction, fucking fiction. Holy fuck. Okay, I'm not gonna play the rest of the video because she ends up regurgitating a lot of what she already said. And then she tries to apply motives to an author that she's never met or read any other works from. She's never read any other fiction or even nonfiction or any diaries, any sort of journal entries from the author of Game of Thrones. She finds a way to create a motive through intellectual dishonesty to somehow apply a motive to somebody that she's never met, that she's never read anything from, to somehow find racism into that specific person. That's what we're getting at, completely ignoring the fact, completely just bypassing the setting of the literature. Okay, that's just as simple as that, and it's fucking retarded. People have interests in medieval Europe because it interests them and is part of their culture. White people have a sort of connection to Europe, whether or not they should, because we can sit there and be like, oh, well, they had nothing to do with that history, blah, 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 just like white people nowadays don't have anything to do with slavery. But people are drawn to that history, their ancestry of Europe. We came from Europe. White people, for the most part, came from Europe. European Americans, Portuguese, Spaniards, the British Empire, Germans, even Nazis. That's why we're so obsessed with fucking World War II, because it was something, partly one of the greatest, not the greatest, but the most horrific acts in all of World War II was done by the Germans, the white people. So yeah, in recent history, Europe and North America has played a huge part in what has been happening in the United States, or in the entire world. Sorry, I'm so American, I can't get America out of my head. You are just connecting things that do not need to be connected for no fucking reason other than to fit your narrative or your agenda. Really, what you're talking about doesn't fucking matter, and I spent 20 minutes talking about something that clearly does not fucking matter. Have a good day.